Vienna, 1903. Just as the snow began to fall over Schönbrunn Palace's stone balustrades, Queen Adalina stood alone in the winter orangery, her gloved hands trembling as she held a letter she wasn't meant to read. The fire crackled low behind her. Orange light flickered on the glass panes, throwing her reflection back at her tall, composed, a crown of mahogany hair pinned with pearls. But her eyes, wide and wet, betrayed her. She had read the king's words 3 times now, and still they burned. I have accepted the child as mine. No one must ever know. The boy will be raised at court. Keep the truth buried, especially from Adalina. The queen's fingers curled against the paper. Her husband, King Leopold IV of Austria, had fathered a child with a lady-in-waiting, one of her own. The boy had been born 5 months ago and kept hidden in the countryside under the guise of a diplomatic ward. Now, he was being brought to the palace. Adalina had tried, God knew she had tried. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of doctors, herbalists, prayers in Latin and in silence. 7 years of waiting for a child that never came. And now this. She didn't cry. She wouldn't. Instead, she folded the letter with slow precision, tucked it back beneath the stack of royal correspondence, and turned toward the hallway. Her heels clicked softly on marble as she walked through the West Wing, past portraits of long-dead queens with infants in their arms. She didn't go to her chambers. She couldn't bear the silence there. Instead, she veered left, into the old library wing unused since the death of Leopold's father. The heavy doors groaned open, and the scent of vellum and dust wrapped around her like a shawl. She wasn't alone. A man stood near the far shelves, a ladder pulled halfway out. He turned at the sound of her entrance. He was young, perhaps 30, with dark blonde hair tied back at the nape, a charcoal waistcoat, and ink stains on his fingers. He bowed immediately. "Your Majesty." Adalina stopped. "You are not court staff." "No," he said, straightening but keeping his eyes respectfully averted. "I'm the boy's tutor." "The boy?" He hesitated. "The one arriving from Styria today? Prince Matthias." "Of course." The king hadn't wasted time. "And you are?" "Peregrin Graves, Your Majesty. I was summoned from the University of Graz." She stepped closer, her gaze narrowing. "You've seen him?" "The boy?" "Yes, briefly." "Does he look like the king?" Peregrin shifted, then met her eyes with careful honesty. "He has his eyes." Adalina let out a soft, bitter breath and turned away, staring at the rows of books. "I was not told he would come so soon," she said. "I was told to prepare him for court life." Peregrin's voice was gentle, but firm. "And to protect him, if needed." That caught her attention. She turned. "Protect him from what?" Peregrin looked at her directly then. "From gossip. From shame. From being used." Adalina's chin lifted. "And who will protect me, Mr. Graves?" The question hung between them, sharp and quiet. Peregrin didn't answer. Not with words. Instead, he stepped forward, slowly, and took her gloved hand in both of his, lowering his head. His touch was warm. "Steady." "I will," he said. She didn't pull away. The boy arrived that afternoon in a snow-dusted carriage, bundled in navy wool, clutching a wooden horse. He was small, only 5, but his posture was already unnaturally upright. He had the king's eyes. Yes, but there was something else too. A solemn stillness. A watchfulness that felt too old for such a small child. Adalina watched from behind a silk curtain as Peregrin crouched to greet him, speaking softly, pointing toward the palace with a reassuring smile. The boy nodded and took Peregrin's hand. That night, Adalina didn't attend the royal supper. She sat instead in the small music room, staring at the silent piano, her hands resting in her lap. There was a knock. She turned. Peregrin stood in the doorway, holding a silver tray with 2 steaming cups. "Chamomile," he said. "I thought you might not sleep." She hesitated, then nodded. He stepped inside, placed the tray on the low table, and took the seat beside her without invitation but without offense. They drank in silence. After a long moment, Adalina asked, "Why did you say you'd protect him? And me?" He looked into his cup. "Because you both deserve better than this lie." She leaned back, the firelight casting shadows across her face. "And what do you deserve, Mr. Graves?" He met her gaze. Something honest. She didn't answer. But when his hand brushed hers as he reached for his cup again, she didn't move away. In the days that followed, the palace shifted. The boy Matthias was installed in a royal suite near the nursery wing, but not announced publicly as heir. Whispers flew, of course, but none dared say the words aloud. Adalina made no comment. She hosted teas, attended mass, walked the palace gardens with a smile that never touched her eyes. Only Peregrin saw the fractures. He brought her books he thought she'd like. Poetry from Provence, botanical sketches from the Americas, letters from queens who had ruled without children and still shaped empires. He spoke gently, but never down to her. He challenged her when she needed it, and said nothing when silence was kinder. He never once spoke the king's name. One morning, it rained without warning as Adalina crossed the terrace. Peregrin was there in an instant, opening his umbrella, holding it over her head. Their arms brushed. Her breath caught. "You always appear at the right time," she said. "I watch," he replied. "For the boy. For you." She looked up at him through the curtain of rain, heart pounding. That night, she wrote a letter and burned it. The next, she found a note tucked into the margin of a book he'd left her. The truth is not always the enemy. Sometimes it's the beginning. She pressed her fingers to the ink. 1 week later, King Leopold left for a diplomatic summit in Prague. Adalina didn't say goodbye. That evening, she met Peregrin in the old library as the bells of Vespers tolled. She wore no crown, only a simple gown of deep plum and her hair braided down her back. "You knew," she said, "before you came here. About the boy. About me." He nodded. "They told me you were barren. That you'd be cold. And am I?" "No," he said, stepping closer. "You're fire beneath ice. You're the only one honest enough to hurt." She reached for him then, fingers trembling as they touched his collar. He cupped her face with aching care, and when their lips met, it wasn't desperate. It was new and real. The queen, the tutor, the king's secret no longer belonged to him alone. The following week, Vienna thawed under a shy sun, and with it, the palace shifted again quietly, the way old buildings adapt to new truths. The corridors still echoed with the click of heels and the rustle of silk, but in the eastern wing, where the child Prince Matthias now lived, the air was gentler. Peregrin spent each morning with the boy in the old astronomy salon, its domed ceiling painted with constellations that had once guided emperors. Adalina watched them from a distance, at first through half-open doors or from the shade of a colonnade, never interfering, only listening. One afternoon, she stepped inside. Matthias sat cross-legged on a wool rug, a globe between his palms, while Peregrin knelt beside him, pointing out the direction of the Bosporus. "Your Majesty," Peregrin said, rising. The boy stood too, a little stiffly, his hand still resting on the globe. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said, though she had. "You're always welcome," Peregrin replied. She turned to Matthias. "Will you show me what you've learned?" The boy hesitated, then nodded and pointed shyly to the eastern seas. "This is where the ships come from with oranges." "Very good," she said, crouching beside him. "And do you know where they grow?" "On trees. They smell like soap." He said it with such solemnity that she laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in weeks. Matthias blinked at her, then smiled for the first time. Later, as the boy was led away by his governess for supper, Adalina remained behind, her fingers trailing over the carved leg of a telescope stand. "I see what you meant," she said without looking up. "In what way?" "He's careful. He watches before he speaks, like someone already accustomed to being misunderstood." Peregrin folded his arms, leaning against the window frame. "He listens more than he talks. That's a rare trait in a prince." She turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "You're wasting yourself here." His brow furrowed. "Why do you say that? You belong in lecture halls, in salons, not tutoring a child who will never inherit a throne." Peregrin's voice was low. "I don't measure my worth by the future titles of my pupils. And yet you serve a palace where everyone does." "Not everyone." She looked away, toward the mountains just visible beyond the city's edge. "Do you ever regret it coming here?" "I never expected anything of comfort," he said. "But I didn't expect to meet someone who made the discomfort meaningful." Adalina's hand gripped the edge of the table. "You should be careful. Words like that have consequences. I've already accepted them." She turned back to him then, and something passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. Not promise, not yet, but something that dared lean in that direction. That evening, she sent word to the palace steward to have a new suite prepared for Peregrin. Not nearer to Matthias, but nearer to the east gardens where the rose walls would soon bloom. The following morning, she met Peregrin there. The path was still damp from dew, gravel crunching underfoot. She wore a coat trimmed in sable, a gift from the Russian ambassador's wife years ago. Peregrin waited beside the white marble fountain that no longer flowed in winter. "You're early," she said. "I couldn't sleep." "Nor I." They walked in silence for a time, the bare vines casting shadows across the path. When they reached the low stone bench at the garden's edge, she sat, and he joined her without asking. "I spoke to the archbishop," she said, her voice level. Peregrin looked at her, surprised. "About the child?" "No. About annulment." His breath caught. "You would leave the king?" "I would not be the first queen in Europe to do so quietly." "And what would you gain? Freedom? Or scandal?" Adalina's gaze didn't waver. "Truth." Peregrin was silent for a long time. Then he said, "And if you had truth, what would you do with it?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled out a small, folded paper. She handed it to him. He unfolded it carefully. It was a petition signed only by her and sealed with the royal crest. "I've asked the council," she said, "to appoint me guardian of the child." Peregrin looked up sharply. "That will stir more than whispers. I am done being silent." "And what of your place here?" She drew a slow breath. "That will remain, but not beside Leopold." "You mean to stay?" "For the people. For the child." Peregrin folded the paper again, tucking it into his coat. "You do not need to do it alone. I know that now." They sat in stillness, the sun rising higher, pale gold on the stone. When she stood to leave, he rose with her, but this time, she reached for his hand. Not hidden, not hesitant. He held it, and they walked back toward the palace, steps steady, neither looking behind. The council met in the red salon beneath frescoes of the Habsburg saints and a chandelier that had once belonged to Maria Theresa. They sat in a semicircle, 6 of them, each in velvet chairs gilded at the arms, their rings heavy with lineage and loyalty. Adalina entered precisely at the hour, not with fanfare, but with a posture so upright it drew silence. Her gown was slate blue silk, severe in its simplicity, with only a brooch of lapis at her throat. She did not smile. She handed the petition signed again in her hand, this time with a revised clause requesting guardianship, by right of maternal stewardship, to the chamberlain without a word. Baron Eder, the eldest of the council, lowered his spectacles with a sigh. "Your Majesty, this petition presumes you intend to raise the child within your household." "It is not a presumption," she replied. "It is a declaration." The chamberlain cleared his throat delicately. "There will be questions." "There already are," she said. "Let us at least answer one with dignity." They debated, as they must. She stood still through it all, eyes steady, hands folded. Only once did she glance toward the east windows, where the edge of the city could be seen through frost-veiled panes. She did not look back again. By late afternoon, the council yielded not because she had pleaded, but because she had not. Authority, when worn without apology, often speaks louder than argument. That evening, she returned to the eastern wing. Matthias was in the nursery, lining small painted soldiers along the edge of the hearth. Peregrin was nearby, cataloging new volumes from the Imperial Library, sleeves rolled to the elbow, posture relaxed despite the formality of the room. She waited until the governess entered to collect the boy for supper before she crossed to Peregrin. "They agreed," she said. He looked up slowly. "Then it begins." "No," she said. "Now it continues." She sat beside him on the low window bench, her fingers resting against the carved wood. Outside, snow began to fall again, not heavy but constant. She watched it for a moment before speaking again. "I want to take him to Luxembourg in the spring." Peregrin nodded. "He'll be safe there. It's quieter. I want to teach him how to plant things," she said. "Not just memorize names, but how to tend." He glanced toward her, a softness passing over his expression. "You'll be good at that." She looked down. "I don't know how to be a mother." "You know how to be constant," he said. "That's rarer." A long silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncertain. It was full. She turned then, fully, facing him for the first time since the petition had passed. "I don't want him to grow up in a palace where every kindness must be hidden." Peregrin's voice was quiet. "Then don't hide." "There's more," she said, her voice low. "Leopold is maneuvering. He's invited the Archduchess of Hungary to court. Her daughter is of age." Peregrin's brow furrowed. "A second marriage?" "Not yet, but he's setting the stage." He wants the throne's continuity secured in public eyes, whether or not in truth. Peregrin leaned back against the paneling, jaw tight. Then you must stay visible. Not as his queen. As the boy's guardian. His future depends on you. And yours? She asked. He met her gaze without hesitation. My loyalty was never to the crown. She reached for his hand, gloved in winter wool, and held it between hers. I want you with us at Luxembourg, she said. Not as tutor. He stilled. What am I instead? She didn't answer with words. Instead, she removed her glove and placed her bare palm against his. I don't want a secret, she said. I want a life. He stood then, and when he bent to kiss her, it was not hurried. It was deliberate, slow as snow settling on stone. That night, she wrote to the steward to begin preparations for Luxembourg. Not for a visit. For a season. She ordered rooms aired, linen pressed, the orchard hedge trimmed. She asked for the eastern solarium to be opened early, for the piano to be tuned. When she returned to her chambers, she found a book left on her writing desk. The cover was vellum, the title in ink so faded she had to hold it to the candlelight letters of Elizabeth of Bavaria. Inside was a pressed violet. No note. She tucked it into her keepsake box, beside a ribbon she no longer wore and a faded drawing of a bird Matthias had given her without explanation. Outside, the bells of St. Stephen's told the hour. Spring was still weeks away, but she no longer feared the waiting. The morning they departed for Luxembourg, frost clung to the carriage windows though the calendar claimed April. The city had not yet surrendered to spring, but the countryside beckoned with softer light and the promise of quieter days. Adalina sat across from Matthias, who clutched a small satchel of carved animals. Peregrin rode behind on horseback, not as staff now, but as part of their party unacknowledged in title, yet no longer invisible. A governess and 2 footmen accompanied the group, their presence discreet but necessary. They arrived at the hunting lodge before dusk. The estate, long unused in winter, stood half-shadowed by the forest, its ochre stone walls dulled by ivy and time. A fire had already been laid in the east drawing room, and a trail of footprints in the gravel revealed that the steward had come ahead to prepare, as instructed. Adalina stepped down first. Her boots met the softened earth with a quiet firmness that didn't waver. She glanced back only once, to see Peregrin dismounting, his coat caught by the wind, his eyes already lifted toward the upper windows. Inside, the rooms bore the scent of cedar and old textiles. The solarium had been opened as she asked, and the piano gleamed under its sheet. She touched the keys once softly, experimentally, then closed the lid. That evening, the household dined in the smaller salon. Matthias sat between Adalina and the governess, his posture relaxed for the first time in weeks. He asked if deer ever came to drink from the pond, and Peregrin told him, yes, if you were quiet enough and early enough. That settled it. Matthias asked to be woken before sunrise. After the child was taken up to bed, Adalina lingered beside the hearth. Peregrin stood nearby, warming his hands, his expression unreadable. You've been here before, she said. Once, he replied. I was 12. My father brought me for a day's hunt, though I was more interested in the clouds. She studied him. You never speak of your family. There's not much to say. They're merchants in grass, linen, and tobacco. They think my life here is peculiar. And is it? He met her gaze. Only in how much it matters to me. She turned toward the fire. I've never had a place that felt like mine. He crossed to her slowly, stopping just short of touch. Then let this be it. She didn't speak, but she reached for his hand. The next morning, Matthias rose before light. The governess led him down to the pond with Peregrin, while Adalina remained behind, writing at the desk in her chamber. The letter was not addressed. It was more reflection than correspondence, a habit she had begun quietly in Vienna after discovering the king's deception. The act of putting ink to paper steadied her. By mid-morning, Peregrin returned with the boy, both dusted in early pollen. Matthias carried a feather from a heron, which he insisted was a sign. Adalina smiled, not out of politeness, but because she felt genuinely lighter. That afternoon, she walked the orchard path alone. The trees had not yet bloomed, but buds curled tight at each branch. She passed beneath them slowly, her thoughts not heavy, just full. She found Peregrin at the far edge of the grounds, where the old chapel had long stood disused. He was seated on the stone steps, his sleeves rolled, and ink smudged again at his wrist. An open notebook lay beside him. "You write," she said. He looked up, then nodded. "Not well." She sat beside him. "What do you write about?" "Small things." He passed her the notebook without hesitation. She read a few lines. Observations. Fragments. A description of the sound frost makes when it breaks underfoot. A line about the way a child's voice can change the shape of a room. She handed it back gently. "You see what most people miss. That's why I saw you." Her breath hitched, not from surprise, but from recognition. "I think," she said slowly, "that if I had met you before the crown, I would have still chosen you." He didn't answer with words. He reached over and brushed mud from the hem of her skirt, an ordinary gesture, but one that felt like a vow. They returned to the house as evening fell. The lamps had been lit. The boy was asleep. The governess nodded as she passed them in the corridor, a silent, understanding exchanged in her glance. In Adalina's chamber, they did not speak much. Peregrin removed his coat. She let down her hair. There was no urgency in their touch, only reverence. The way he brushed his thumb across her collarbone. The way she rested her forehead against his shoulder. No declarations, just presence. The next day, the sun came at last clean and steady, and the orchard opened. The first blossoms came white and reluctant. Adalina stood at the window with Matthias beside her, pointing to a bird in the branches. Peregrin entered carrying a book of sketches. He didn't interrupt. He simply joined them, his presence quiet and certain. And for the first time, the silence in the room felt like peace.